Well, hi everyone. Welcome to the New England Racing Show, Manchester, New Hampshire, Channel 23. Also on YouTube, and like us on Facebook, and you get the show every week. Well, next few weeks, we're going to show you how to set up your wicked cool midget race car. We've been racing midgets for about 10 years now, and we have the same car that we had 10 years ago. So we're getting our money's worth out of it. And we have it down pretty well. So just to give you a brief history of our series, it started off as the USAC Ford Focus Series. And we raced all over the Northeast. Races in New York, Oswego, Chemung Speedway, Spencer Speedway, down in New Jersey at Wall Speedway, Wall Stadium, Waterford, Seekonk, all over, Beach Ridge, Star Speedway. And it was quite a bit of traveling, which took a toll on the teams because a lot of them were from New York and they had to travel 6 hours to race out here. We had to travel 6 hours to go race out there. And then we saw costs getting out of hand with $1,200 shocks, carbon fiber bodies, people spending $50,000 on a car when there was no need to. So, and we ran wingless with USAC. So the series ended up dwindling down to 6 cars and then disbanding. NEMA picked us up, and we became the NEMA Light Series under Bobby Seymour's direction. And we went from 6 cars to last year having 28 starters at the Boston Louis race. So it was wildly successful. But we saw costs getting out of hand there, too, with the introduction of the Honda engine by some board of directors members, and an engine that cost like almost 3 times as much as our Focus engines. So we decided that, where we couldn't compete with the Honda engines, that we didn't all want to go out and buy new engines at $13,000 a whack. So we decided to go off on our own, seeing as how we all had Focus engines, and thus ends up being the wicked cool midgets. And we didn't want to travel 6-8 hours to go race. So our schedule is 4 races at Star, 2 at Hudson, 3 at Beach Ridge, and 2 or 3 at Oxford, and 1 at Waterford. So it's all local racing, and cost, affordable. Affordable means different things to different people, but affordable means you can get a car for $12,000. The engines last 3 or 4 years before you have to rebuild them, and buy 1 or 2 tires a week, and your purse pretty much pays for a tire. So I think that's affordable, and good, close, even racing, too. So we have our car in the shop, which is our 2-stall garage. And what we're doing is this past Sunday, PJ, the driver, and the crew chief, pretty much does all the hard work on the car, the thinking and setting it up and everything. Was good enough to go over the car, basic safety features we started out with, and then maintenance that you got to do every week, how to keep the car in top shape without it falling apart on you. And that's our first series, our first week. Our second week will be setting the car up, scaling it, telling all about the adjustments on it, what springs to use, what shock valving and everything. We're giving you all our secrets, so we're not holding anything back. We want everyone to succeed in this series. And by the way, PJ won more races in NEMA Light last year than anyone. Even though he missed 5 races, he won 4, which was more than anybody else. And, of course, everyone says we're cheating. We had a big engine, all kinds of extra goodies. So they brought in an engine builder at Waterford Speed Bowl, and they checked our engine, checking compression, the ports, the stroke, the exhaust ports, intake ports, everything. And when it was all said and done, the director of the NEMA Light series shook my hand. He said, "Congratulations. You have the stockest engine of all of them that we've checked. And you're not winning on power. So I'm going to tell everyone they're going to have to step it up. You're winning on handling and driving." And that's something that we're going to try to help our members with, is handling. And our part 2 will be setting the car up in the garage. Part 3 will be getting to the track, what you got to do, what you got to check for, and some driving techniques. So we'll start with the today, a brief overview of the safety features of the car and the maintenance. Here in Candia, New Hampshire, the number 11 Wicked Cool Midget. We are going to show you how to maintain your Midget, a little bit about it, and how to set it up, what to do at the track, and in general pretty much give you a basic understanding of what the car needs, and how to set it up, and how to be competitive. So we have our crew chief, PJ Stergios, also the driver, and we're going to start off with some of the safety features that the car has and things that you need to keep checking on it. Okay, PJ, so the first thing on the safety is the seat, correct?
Yeah, on this car right here we have the Butler full containment seat. It's modular, it's just one unit. It has the headrest, the shoulder rest, all welded together in one solid seat structure here. And if you want to come over here, we can check out. We have we have it mounted in 2 spots on the bottom where underneath the seat, which you can't see right now. But there's 2 3/8 bolts there, grade 8. 2 more here under where the seat belt mounts. And we also have these loops up here at the top that keep the seat in place in a very heavy collision, which hopefully you don't have, but it's racing and things happen. So.
And the seat's made to fit the driver, right?
Yes, yeah, this is a custom seat. Butler has a sheet where you can send the measurements of your height and waist and shoulders and everything else, and they'll build a seat to fit the particular driver.
Okay, well, what about the seat belts themselves?
So here we have a 5-point harness, Pro Enterprises, quick latch system here. Some drivers prefer the cam lock style, but I prefer the latch here. I think it's easier to get out of in an emergency. So we have that. We also have another important safety feature is the quick release here. You also want to make sure that's nice and greased up and moves really freely. So in an emergency, you can pop the steering wheel off as quick as you can without any hitches. Then we also in here have, would you come and take a look over here and zoom in on something that I just put into the car last year, this torque ball padding. So your legs avoid getting knocked around in a wreck. And this carbon fiber cover over the steering box to keep your knees from hitting the
sharp objects.
Yeah, the fittings and everything else on the steering box, just to provide a little bit more padding in the event of an accident. So safety, of course, is number 1, and you want to, it's racing, so accidents happen, unfortunately, and you want to try to do the best you can to protect yourself against whatever can happen out on the track.
And also, I understand when you're mounting your seat belts in the back to the frame, you try to get them up as high as you can, close to the slots they go through, so they don't stretch as much. You see, some people have the seat belts tied way down here, and then the seat belts tend to stretch more in an accident, but it's better to get them as high as you can. Kill switches. Tell us about the kill switches and the throttle return switches.
So on this car here, we have 2 kill switches. Of course, the one right up here on the dashboard, And we also have one here down on the pedal here. So we have a toe strap that goes over the pedal, and in the case of a stuck throttle, your first instinct is going to be to pull your foot back and try to close the throttle manually rather than try to reach over here and fumble with a switch, because this happens at over 100 miles an hour and you don't have much time to react. So up here we have a kill switch, so as soon as you pull your foot back, it cuts the ignition on the car. And even if the throttle is stuck wide open, it will kill the engine, and you can at least try to get the car slowed down enough before hitting the wall. So I think that's a very important safety measure, and I don't see a lot of cars that have it, but I wouldn't drive one that doesn't have it. So it's very important to have both of those in the car.
And throttle return springs, what do you have for throttle returns?
So I have, for throttle springs, we have one here on the pedal, and then two more on the throttle linkage. This one right here, and another one back here on that end of the throttle. So if something comes loose in between, we have one on each end to make sure that the throttle returns.
And you make sure that all the parts are lubricated so
Yep.
nothing can hang up.
Yes, this is something you want to check every week. Every time that you race, hit the track, because stuck throttles are not
Bad
pretty,
things.
and you want to make sure everything is nice and tight and moves freely, because it's very important to check every week and not something you want to go wrong.
And now you talked about safety wiring, bolts, is it?
Yep. So anytime safety wiring, like bolts like this where there's no nut on the other side, usually I try to make sure that safety wire it and use red thread lock on it when you thread it in. This way, if it wants to loosen, which is turning counterclockwise, that the safety wire keeps the bolt in check. I use it for things like that where there's no nut on the other side here, both sides of the drag link.
Yeah, that's your steering wheel, you don't have that coming loose.
Of course, yeah, that's very important. And another one up here where the panhard bar bolt goes through. Some cars have a nut on the other side, this car does not, the way the axle was built. So, of course, there. And if you can see it in here where the steering arm bolts onto the spindle, I have safety wires on both sides of that, on also the right front too. So anything where there's no nut on the other side and the potential is there for it to loosen up, Murphy's Law, of course, if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. So you want to prepare yourself against that.
Okay. Well, there's your safety features, the main safety features. As far as maintenance goes every week, we use 530 oil, and we use Royal Purple, but you can use Lucas oil, correct?
Yep.
You want to use racing oil because it has a lot of zinc in it. So when we use a Royal Purple, it's the racing oil, not just stuff that people say, oh, use Mobil 1, it's all right, but it doesn't have the zinc that you need. And you change it every 3 races or so?
Yes.
Okay. Another thing you got to check is the ignition pickup. It's a little cylindrical thing that runs off the crank and picks up the ignition. And you get it from the bottom. But
Yeah.
what you need to do is make sure it's the correct gap. I believe it's 50 thousandths. You got to check the clamp to make sure it stays at. We've had an experience, I believe it was at Waterford, where the car died on us. Come to find out, we didn't have it tight. We didn't do our proper maintenance, and it loosened up and slid away, and there goes your race, your whole weekend, just because you didn't tighten the bolt. So you got to make sure that's done. One of the jobs I do to maintain the Midget is I clean the fuel filters. We have one here on the side of the engine, and not only do I clean that in between races, but we'll go out and do a couple of practices, and maybe the heat, and then I'll take it apart here and here, take it apart, and I use non-chlorinated brake fluid, which is Brake best to cleaner, clean not it brake with. fluid.
Any O-rings, I'll lubricate them with engine oil or rear end grease. and put them back together. There's another fuel filter in the tank here that you get at. You take this whole cover off and pull it off, and you can get at that fuel filter. So I do that every couple of races. Then this car has a safety feature. It's the Waterman cable. It is the fuel pump. So I'll take the cable off. It runs off the back of the power steering unit. Pull the cable out. It's like an old speedometer cable. Clean it, and then feed it back in and grease it as I feed it back in with just some bearing regular grease, but the red stuff, and then put it back together. That way it's not going to bind up on you. Now you're talking about Marvel Mystery Oil in between races. What do you do with that, PJ?
Yes, methanol is a very corrosive fuel. It has a tendency to form like a gel, turn into a gel-like substance if you let it sit for more than a couple of weeks. So if you're not racing back-to-back weeks, and really, to be honest, even if you are, just to be safe and make sure your fuel system is maintained properly, what you have to do is take the fuel injector links off here and spray Marvel Mystery Oil down into the cylinders and just bump the engine over a couple of times with the starter just to get the mystery oil into the cylinders to keep it from gelling up inside the engine. And the same goes for the fuel block over here where the fuel comes in and goes out. This is one of your return bypasses. You're going to want to take this fitting off, spray Marvel Mystery Oil into everything there. Of course, drain your fuel out first. I just blow it out with compressed air into a empty container, but spray Marvel Mystery Oil into all of that, into your low speed bypass here, and also on the back into your high speed bypass here. We have a diaphragm, a Kinsler diaphragm high speed bypass, so you'll want to take this fitting off, spray Marvel Mystery Oil inside of that, and make sure that everything keeps from gelling up and stays nice and clean inside. And another thing is, if we don't have the Waterman style fuel pump like we have on this car, if you have the older Hillborn style, you'll want to make sure you take the lines off of that and spray Marvel Mystery Oil into that as well, just to keep it from gelling up once the car sits for more than a week or so.
And I see cars that don't have the Waterman. They'll have a fuel filter in line with an arm that you move to turn it on and off. And one of the things that you want to make sure is when you turn it on, the arm is even with a fuel pump, and you'll take some tape, electrical tape or duct tape, and tape it so that if something happens, a car either gets turned over on its side or hits something, gets bumped, that the arm doesn't shut the fuel off. People have learned that lesson the hard way. Also, when you're changing the engine oil, I forgot to mention this, you change the filter. When you go to put the new oil filter back on, you'll want to fill it up with oil before you put it back on, just so that when you start it, you don't have an oil starvation in the engine. Okay, now every week you do a nut and bolt check. You want to run us through that real quick? What you check for?
Yeah, so pretty much anything that's on the car that you can tighten, you should check it over. If you're racing back-to-back nights, sometimes you can just kind of, take a shortcut and make sure that, I try to make sure that everything with the engine, throttle linkage, the seat, and of course all my hubs, the brakes, your brake mounts, your steering mounts, shocks, your hubs, your spindle nuts, and your kingpins. Everything there moves a lot, has a tendency to come loose, so you want to make sure those are nice and tight every week. And your engine mounts, this particular car has a front engine mount up here. Everything up here likes to vibrate and kind of shake loose even with thread lock, so always check that every week, make sure it's tight. Same goes for where the bell housing mounts onto the firewall, or the motor mount down here in the bottom. Those bolts also kind of have a tendency to come loose, so make sure those are checked on a weekly basis. Also, inside the cockpit, you want to make sure all your steering mount on both sides, on the front and the side, are tight. Your master cylinder, your torque ball mount, throttle linkage, I can't stress that one enough, I guess. All that needs to be nice and tight every week. Your exhaust mount, nobody
Header
likes.
bolts.
Yep, header bolts. Nobody likes to have a muffler that pops off during the race and get black flagged for it. So, of course, make sure all of that is nice and tight.
Then I check the oil lines, the fuel lines. We have the special wrenches. We grab a set of those. You can get these at Seymour Racing.
Yep, these here, aluminum wrenches, come in different sizes for different AN size fittings, and even this adjustable one here for ones that are in between.
So you check all your oil lines, your fuel lines, check your overflow bottle back here, make sure it's not full. Sometimes you have a little bit of overheating, and we use like an old Gatorade bottle or Powerade, and that catches your overflow, so you're not dumping water on the track and making everyone else behind you spin out, which seems like a good idea, but it's not legal. Then
Also on the rear end, you want to make sure everything on the back end here is tight, such as also your brake caliper mount, your brake rotor mount, all your quick change nuts. Those you don't want to, since they're aluminum, you don't want to tighten them too much, so you want to keep an eye and make sure all of that stays tight. On the torque ball, the torque tube where that mounts on the bottom of the chassis, or on the front of the rear end here, all those bolts, there's a lot of stress put on those because that's what's keeping the center section in place, so always check that. And of course, everything back here, same as the front, all your panhard bar, your rear end, trailing link mounts, top and bottom, shocks, weight jacker, you want to make sure that works correctly. And just can never be checked too much here, and always better to be safe than sorry that you didn't check something. For
that's something you should do in the garage, right?
Yep.
So when we go to the track, PJ, Jake, and I, we do our, you come off the track and we charge the battery, we check stagger and all that, and then we're just hanging around. And we look, and other people have pit crews, 4 or 5 guys, and they're running around like crazy trying to do stuff that they should have done during the week, doing the nut and bolt checks. I mean, it doesn't hurt to check them again at the track, but if you do everything in the garage, you get to the track, you shouldn't have to do all that work. Now, you check the injectors too, right? At the track and in the garage. And show us how you check one of them.
Yes, on this car here we have the Kinsler style injectors. The Hillborn ones are a little bit different, but the principle is the same. It's kind of this is a 2-piece injector design. You have the housing which stays inside there, and this is the injector itself. So you'll want to clean that out with brake cleaner, or if you really want to be fancy, you can use a solution and a ultrasonic cleaner. We're not that fancy, so we just do this. Check it, hold it up to the light, make sure you can see through it, and blow through it. Make sure it's not plugged up. Spray it with brake cleaner to make sure that it's nice and clean before you put it back inside. I'm going to be taking this all apart soon anyways to check it, so...
Before the season starts.
Yep, before the season starts, so...
Our first race is April 18th at Oxford Plains. So it's hard to believe it's going to be less than a month away. But hopefully the snow will melt, but the car will be ready. Spark plugs and wires?
Yes. This car right here, we have electromotive ignition. This is the older style one. The newer style ones have the coil and the brain, I guess you could call it, separate. This is all one unit. You want to make sure all your connections here are nice and tight every week. You make sure your plug wires are on tight, and it's good, not a bad idea to pull a plug and take a look at it, and make sure it's a nice light brown color. It's a little bit more difficult to read with methanol than it is with gasoline, but eventually the more you check it, the more you can get a feel as to how your car is running, and reading your plugs, and getting the right fuel mixture.
And as you notice, we have what they call the rolling stands for the Midget, because it doesn't weigh that much. So you'll jack one end up, put it on the rolling stands, and then the other. And the Midgets, that's what's great about the Midgets to work on, is not like our Super, we used to have to jack it up and put it on jack stands, and you couldn't move it around because it was so heavy. But where this weighs about half the weight, it's much easier. Okay, well, our next show, we are going to show you how to set the car up, what we do to set it up for a race. And we will...
Well, thanks to PJ for showing us all that stuff about the Midget. Next week we'll be showing you how to set it up and scale it, talk about shocks, springs, valving of the shocks. We'll tell you everything that we're doing. And our opening day, hard to believe, it's 3 weeks from Saturday up at Oxford Plains. It's their opening night, and we'll be there with the ACT, American Canadian Tour, and the PASS Tour. So it'll be a triple header. So not only will we get to race, we'll get to watch 2 other great races also. And it's nice to be at such a quality track like Oxford Plains, and thanks to Tom Mayberry for inviting us to go up there. So next week we'll just keep going, and another thing we're going to be doing at the track this year is the buddy system, where we're going to match up rookie car owners and drivers with some experienced car owners and drivers, and this way we'll get them up to speed a lot quicker than if we left them to their own on their own, trying to figure things out themselves. So like they say, I can't. I try to learn from the mistakes of others because I don't have time enough to make them all myself. So we're going to help everybody out and make this a successful tour. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you all next week.